Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're doing something really interesting, taking a structured, rigorous look at some incredibly powerful ideas for self-mastery.
That's right. We're diving into the concepts laid out in The Foundations of Angel Wing, Volume 1.
Exactly. And this isn't just theory, it's material designed to fundamentally reshape how you understand your own worth, your own freedom.
Absolutely. But before we jump in, it's really important we acknowledge the people behind this work. A huge thank you is definitely owed to Dr. Chaitanya Kripalu, who is the founder and CEO of the Angel Wing LLC,
Yes.
and also to Dr. Elizabeth Berman. She's a key member of Angel Wing's mastermind group and a very dedicated presenter of these ideas.
Crucial contributions there.
And one more to Sachin Karnik. He's the researcher who did all the vital background work for this volume, The Foundations of Angel Wing, Volume 1. Their combined efforts really paved the way for this exploration.
Absolutely essential acknowledgments.
Oh.
Okay, so let's dive right into the core question that really sets the stage for everything else in this material. If we're aiming for self-mastery, we first have to ask, what is the self? I mean, is it just this body, this physical form? Or is it the mind, that constant stream of thoughts and memories? Or is there something deeper, more independent?
That's the perfect place to start, really, because the material immediately points out a fundamental mistake most of us make in how we build our sense of identity.
Okay, how so?
Well, think about how you usually introduce yourself or how people meet each other. We tend to lead with things from the outside, right?
Like your name, your job?
Your job title, who you're married to, maybe where you live, what school you went to, all external markers.
Right.
And the argument here is we invest so much energy defining ourselves by these outside things that we often, completely miss or fail to even recognize the authentic self that exists underneath all that.
Huh. It's like wearing a costume for so long you forget what you actually look like beneath it.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
And I guess this leads us straight into the mission for this deep dive then. We need to follow the path this material lays out.
Precisely.
So, exploring these 4 basis aspects of self-discovery and transformation, starting with what sounds like the biggest contradiction, the main thing holding us back.
Exactly. The core problem, the biggest obstacle to finding that inner freedom, is what the material calls the paradox of external validation, often shortened to PEV.
PEV. Okay, let's unpack that term straight away, because understanding this paradox, this mechanism, seems absolutely central to figuring out why we get stuck. So what exactly is the paradox of external validation?
Okay, so the paradox lies in this fundamental contradiction. It happens when you try to get your sense of security, your safety, even your feeling of being good enough from sources outside of yourself.
Okay, seeking it externally.
Right. And here's the tragic irony. Doing that, chasing approval, looking for praise, needing acceptance from others, it feels like it gives you security. It gives you the appearance of safety and belonging in that moment.
Yeah, that momentary relief.
But at the same time, it systematically makes you completely dependent on those external things. It perpetuates this reliance, and the end result is always a loss of your own inner freedom and actually a deep sense of vulnerability.
Wow. That really is the ultimate psychological trap then, isn't it?
Right.
Because it taps into such a deep-seated need. We're sort of wired biologically, culturally to want acceptance.
Oh, absolutely. That drive to feel adequate, to be accepted, that's the engine powering the whole thing.
So how does the mechanism work? How do we get caught?
Well, it's deceptively simple but devastating. It starts when we absorb, often unconsciously, the standards dictated by external forces.
Like society, family.
Society, culture, media, maybe our family institutions. We just soak up these ideals about what success looks like, what happiness is, what makes a person worthy.
Like sponges.
Exactly. And then we spend our lives constantly measuring ourselves, our personal worth, against these benchmarks, these external ideals that are always shifting, often impossible to meet consistently.
And that's what makes it so seductive, right?
Yeah.
Because when you do manage to conform, when you get that promotion or the likes on social media or maybe, that nod of approval from someone important, for that brief moment, it feels solid.
It feels like you finally got a foundation for your self-worth. You feel secure, validated, maybe even complete.
Yeah.
But that security, according to this material, is basically a mirage. It stresses that relying on external validation slowly, steadily chips away at your intrinsic worth. It creates this systemic vulnerability that's almost impossible to break free from until you actually see the pattern for what it is.
Okay, but hang on. I have to push back slightly here.
Yeah.
In the real world, we do need feedback, don't we?
Yeah.
Like, you need to know if you're performing well at your job or if you're being a good partner or friend. Is this material saying all external input is inherently bad?
That's a really crucial distinction, and thanks for raising it. No, the material isn't saying all feedback is bad. It's drawing a very clear line between necessary external information like performance feedback and validation dependency.
Okay, information versus dependency.
Right. Dependency is when your entire emotional state, your fundamental sense of okayness, hinges on getting that external approval continuously. Information is just data you can use.
Ah,
So if your happiness, your sense of self-worth, relies entirely on, say, your boss constantly praising you or your partner always agreeing with you, well, you enter the state of perpetual dependency. Because the moment they withdraw that approval, which they inevitably will at some point.
your whole world crumbles.
Exactly. Your self-worth collapses because, as the material puts it, you are forever at the mercy of others' perceptions.
So we end up as sort of psychological prisoners, constantly trying to guess what others want and trying to please them.
That's a perfect description. And this dependency, it systematically undermines, even sabotages, the authentic self. All that external conditioning forces your genuine self to go into hiding. It gets buried beneath layers of should and must.
Wow.
You become trapped inside these emotional and mental frameworks that you never actually consciously picked for yourself. Your identity stops being an expression of who you are, and it turns into a constant performance.
A performance.
Yeah, a performance designed strictly to meet external criteria. Criteria that often have absolutely nothing to do with your true nature, your inner desires, or what actually matters to you deep down.
And the material digs deeper into the root of this performance, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It suggests this constant seeking often comes from, like, old emotional wounds.
Yes, very much so. It's often framed as a form of compensation for suffering.
Compensation for suffering. How does that work?
Well, think about it. If you have a deep-seated wound from the past, maybe a feeling of inadequacy from childhood or a sense of rejection, you might subconsciously try to heal that wound by controlling how people see you now.
Ah, trying to get validation today to fix a pain from yesterday.
Precisely. And this behavior, it actually acts as a kind of self-sabotage. It severely limits your potential and your freedom because you're constantly reacting to the ghost of past pain. You're anchored to these preconceived ideas about yourself and about life that came directly from suffering. It's like trying to fill a leaky bucket.
Right.
The material argues pretty strongly that true freedom can only really begin when we stop trying to compensate for past suffering through our current performance for others.
Okay, that makes sense. It's a powerful, if sobering, analysis of the trap. So that brings us to the turning point. If external validation is the trap, the way out must involve looking inward, right? Defining worth internally. This is where the material introduces intrinsic worth.
Exactly. Realizing your intrinsic worth is presented as the absolute prerequisite for any kind of real liberation or self-mastery described in this work.
So let's define it clearly. What is intrinsic worth?
The definition is straightforward but quite radical in its implications. Intrinsic worth means that the source of your value, your worth as a person, originates within you. It's fundamentally not given or taken away by others.
Not conferred by others.
Correct. It's described as something unearned, unchangeable, something that's always present whether you recognize it or not. It's just there.
Okay, and this is where the material starts to move beyond just psychology, isn't it? It delves into the energetic, maybe even spiritual side to explain what this internal source actually is. We're shifting from the self as a mind construct to the self as something more fundamental.
We are indeed. According to the researchers behind this material, if you engage in deep self-exploration, you consistently uncover an inherent nature lying beneath the surface personality.
An inherent nature.
Right.
What's that like?
It's described as embodying the very spirit of things like love, compassion, happiness, and joy. But crucially, these aren't just presented as fleeting emotions that come and go based on circumstances. They're described as profound commonalities that connect us all at the deepest level. They are part of our fundamental makeup.
That sounds lovely, of course, but let's ground it a bit for someone maybe struggling with daily anxiety or feeling like a failure. How does the material square this idea of a universal, joyful, unaltered essence with the very real psychological impact of trauma, upbringing, personality differences?
That's a fair question. It reconciles this by defining individuals fundamentally as beings of energy. You might call it soul or spirit. The key distinction made is between the personality, which absolutely is shaped by upbringing, environment, experiences, trauma, and the core energy.
Oh, okay. So personality versus core energy.
Yes, the personality is seen as transient, influenced, adaptable, but the core energy, the spirit, that remains unaltered throughout your entire life. Think of it like this. Personality is the set of clothes you wear, shaped by trends and wear and tear. The spirit is the body underneath. The clothes change constantly, but the fundamental structure of the body doesn't.
Got it. So this core spirit, the real us at that level, is essentially immune to all the external stuff, the labels, the successes, the failures, the judgments we talked about earlier. Utterly immune. And here's perhaps the most profound assertion in this section of the material. This core spirit isn't just individual. It's described as a shared spirit or core unit.
Shared, meaning?
Meaning it's singular, connects all individuals. At this fundamental energetic level, we are essentially the same. We are one.
Wow, okay.
Realizing that is what shifts your entire perspective. You stop seeing yourself primarily as this isolated, competing ego, separate from everyone else. Instead, you start to recognize yourself as an integral part of a much larger, interconnected consciousness or energy field.
That's a significant leap, philosophically speaking, from individual psychology to a shared, singular energy. For someone just trying to, get through the week without feeling overwhelmed, how does tapping into this deep, shared essence practically help them day to day? The outcome of genuinely realizing this is described as immediately liberating. When you start to grasp that you are an integrated whole mind, body, and this core spirit all unified, you naturally stop frantically searching for validation outside yourself.
Because the source is inside now.
Exactly. The source of girth is recognized as internal, infinite, and already complete. This automatically makes you less dependent on external approval or praise. If the core of who you truly are is unaltered, shared, and inherently valuable, then the paradox of external validation it loses its grip. Its power dissolves.
Right.
This recognition, this shift in understanding, is presented as the gateway. It's what makes achieving genuine inner freedom possible.
Okay, the logic definitely holds.
Yeah.
If my worth is intrinsic, nobody can give it to me and nobody can take it away. But here's a question that always comes up. If this intrinsic worth is so fundamental, so powerful, so unchangeable, why is it so darn hard for most people to stay in that liberated state? If we know this truth or hear about it, why do we constantly fall back into the old patterns? Worrying about opinions, obsessing over mistakes, feeling inadequate.
That brings us squarely into the next major section of the material. Understanding the internal obstacles. Why we struggle to let go and rest in that state of intrinsic worth. The first, and maybe the most common internal hurdle, is termed core dissonance.
Core dissonance. Okay, let's define that and explore how it shows up.
Core dissonance is essentially the intense inner friction, the struggle, and the distress that arises when your implicit belief, often subconscious, that life should unfold in a certain way, clashes with reality.
A certain, rational, predictable way.
Exactly. When that belief hits the wall of actual existence, which is often messy, unpredictable, seemingly irrational, and chaotic, that clash creates dissonance, pain.
And this connects to what the material calls the yardstick, doesn't it? We suffer not just because of what happens, but because we're constantly measuring events against some ideal script we've written in our heads.
Precisely. We walk around with this preconceived notion, the yardstick, of what a successful life, a good relationship, a smooth career path should look like. Maybe it's based on our upbringing or societal messages.
Right.
Then, when reality deviates, maybe there's a betrayal, a job loss, an illness, something unexpected happens, our immediate thought is often, this shouldn't be happening.
This wasn't part of the plan.
Exactly. The distress isn't solely from the event itself, but from the enormous mental energy we expend resisting the fact that reality isn't matching our internal blueprint. We fight against what is.
That resistance must be incredibly draining. If I have a core belief that, say, if I work hard, I must succeed, and then I work my tail off and still face failure,
Yeah.
the internal suffering is huge because my fundamental expectation of how the world works has been violated.
It's profoundly exhausting, and that's why the material puts such a strong emphasis on the struggle against impermanence. Real transformation, it argues, requires accepting life's inherent ups and downs, its ebbs and flows.
Accepting change, loss.
Accepting that everything changes, everything passes. Resisting these natural fluctuations just makes the struggle worse, makes it harder to let go. The goal isn't to achieve some state of permanent bliss where nothing bad ever happens. No. The aim is equanimity, being able to accept all experiences, the pleasant, the unpleasant, without letting them completely throw you off your center. Maintaining balance amidst the waves.
Okay, equanimity, that makes sense. Now, beyond just resisting reality as it unfolds, the material also talks about how our past experiences lock us into specific constraining belief systems. How do those old wounds keep running the show today?
Right. This is about how we allow past hurts like maybe feeling unworthy as a child or being deeply betrayed to dictate our current choices and reactions. This creates constraining belief
Like,
systems.
I can't trust anyone, or I have to be perfect.
Exactly those kinds of things. Beliefs like I must always be perfect to be loved, or trust inevitably leads to pain, or I'm not capable of handling challenges. These act like invisible fences, self-imposed limitations that drastically restrict our freedom and potential. We don't even question them often. But the deeper mechanism operating here is what the material calls subconscious programming.
Subconscious programming. That sounds quite technical. How is it defined, and how do we experience it in this context?
Think of it as the cumulative result of all the unconscious conditioning we've absorbed over years. It shows up as ingrained reflexes, automatic emotional responses, habitual thought patterns.
Look like muscle memory for the mind.
Kind of, yeah. It's what makes us feel like a hostage to long-term conditioning. For example, if someone uses a certain tone of voice that reminds you subconsciously of a critical parent, and you immediately feel that knot of anxiety in your stomach or get defensive, that's programming kicking in.
Ah, okay. The automatic reaction.
Yes. These ingrained habitual responses often trigger predictable, unwanted physical and physiological reactions to muscle tension, maybe digestive issues, chronic fatigue, unless we become consciously aware of the program and learn how to interrupt that cycle.
And this is where that really vivid analogy comes in, the one about the psychological film. Can you walk us through how that film gets created and then keeps replaying?
Okay, so the creation process is described psychologically. It starts when a negative experience, maybe cruelty, perceived failure, intense criticism gets encoded in the mind as a specific thought or set of thoughts.
Like a memory trace.
More than just a memory, that thought immediately triggers corresponding emotional responses: fear, shame, anger, helplessness. If these emotions are strong enough, or if the experience is repeated, these feelings become deeply lodged in the subconscious. They persist.
Right.
This whole chain reaction, the initial event, the thought it created, the intense emotion, the lingering feeling, that entire sequence becomes the psychological film.
So the film isn't just the visual memory, it's the whole package. The thought, the feeling, the physical sensation, all bundled together.
Precisely. It's a stored pattern. And then whenever a trigger occurs in the present, maybe it's a similar situation, a particular word, a tone of voice, even just a stressful feeling, the brain often bypasses conscious thought.
It just hits play.
It hits play automatically. The old film starts rolling, bringing back the old thoughts, feelings, and reactions. It perpetuates this damaging cycle of reaction and suffering, making us respond not to the present reality, but to the ghost of the past captured in that film.
Wow. That really clarifies how the past keeps intruding.
Yeah.
And layered on top of this programming issue is another major cognitive error the material points out: erroneous self-identification.
Yes. Erroneous identification is when we define our core self based on these transient things like the labels from our psychological films: I am a failure, I am unlovable, our past experiences, or how others have treated us. We start to believe that these external factors or past events exclusively define who we are.
We mistake the costume for the person again.
Exactly. And this is a huge obstacle because if you fundamentally believe you are your past pain or you are that negative label, you'll subconsciously resist anything that threatens that identity, even if that something is liberation or healing. The known pain feels safer than the unknown freedom.
And that erroneous belief seems to feed directly into what's called mind identification, right? If we think we are the labels, we identify completely with the mind that holds those labels and replays those films.
Yes, absolutely. Mind identification is described as the state where you identify exclusively with the contents of your mind, your thoughts, your worries, your plans, your judgments, even your physical sensations. This state, the material argues, makes a truly fulfilling life almost impossible.
Way impossible.
Because the mind, by its nature, is largely a memory and projection machine. It constantly replays the past, especially painful memories, and projects anxieties onto the future. It persistently recalls the memory of pain, the story of inadequacy, long after the actual physical threat or discomfort might have passed. It keeps the wound alive through thought.
It's like the mind is insisting on driving the car by looking only in the rearview mirror, even though the road ahead has changed completely.
That's a perfect analogy. And all this, the constant clinging to past films, identifying with thoughts, the resistance to reality, it leads to immense mental clutter.
Mental clutter.
Yeah, and it's not just random noise. It's the specific result of internalizing all those constraining belief systems, constantly comparing our messy reality against impossible societal norms or internal yardsticks, and often limiting our focus to a very small, self-centered circle of concerns. What about me? My problems. This clutter creates huge internal resistance to expansion, to growth, to just being present and accessing that quiet space of intrinsic worth.
Okay, wow. We've really mapped out the problem. The paradox of external validation is the trap, the concept of intrinsic worth as the true self, and now these significant internal obstacles: core dissonance, subconscious programming, and erroneous identification.
Wait.
So logically, the next step is the solution. We arrive at the path towards self-mastery and transformation. How do we actually break free from these deeply rooted patterns and shackles?
Right. The material is very clear here. The ultimate goal is liberation, freedom from these constraints. And the process really ignites with that first crucial revelation we touched on earlier, the realization that the mind is not the self.
Okay, we've heard that. But how does simply knowing that distinction practically lead to freedom? It sounds simple, but feels profound.
It's profound because it shifts your entire relationship with your thoughts and emotions.
Yeah.
When you truly realize you are the integrated whole, the underlying spiritual energy, the physical body, and the mind operating as a sophisticated tool, but not the master part, you achieve a state of self-awareness. You become the observer.
The observer of the mind.
Yes. An awareness that transcends the mind and its stories, its dramas, its limitations. This allows you to consciously return to what the material refers to as the original state, a natural state of underlying tranquility and stability that's always there beneath the mental noise. You can learn to rest in a liberated state of self, where you're not constantly pushed and pulled by every past thought, every fleeting desire, every traumatic memory. You're unencumbered.
So if the mind is just a tool, not the master, then self-mastery involves learning how to use that tool consciously, instead of letting it run wild on autopilot based on old programming. This must bring us to the core practice outlined: non-reaction and responsibility.
Absolutely central. Self-mastery fundamentally involves developing the capacity to observe your own mental and emotional processes without judgment.
Without judgment, that sounds hard.
It is. It takes practice. But when a trigger happens, when that psychological film starts to flicker on, the first crucial step is recognizing, there's the old pattern starting. And then realizing that the habitual reaction that usually follows is not compulsory. It's not inevitable. You actually have a choice.
A choice point.
A choice point. And the material really emphasizes the mind-body connection here, making it very practical.
Okay, tell us more about the biology of that connection. How does it ground this practice in our physical reality?
Well, when an intense emotion flares up, like anger, fear, deep distress, especially if it's triggered by one of those old psychological films, it doesn't just stay in the mind. It immediately activates the body's limbic system.
The fight or flight system.
Exactly. The fight or flight stress response kicks in. And this floods your body with a powerful cocktail of chemicals, things like cortisol, adrenaline. Now, in short bursts for actual emergencies, that's useful. But if it's happening chronically day after day because you're constantly reacting emotionally,
It takes a toll.
a huge toll. It negatively affects physical health, contributes to inflammation, high blood pressure, digestive issues, anxiety disorders, chronic exhaustion.
So when we're stuck in habitual reactions, we're not just having a bad mental day, we're literally physiologically stressing, even poisoning our bodies with these chemicals over and over.
That's exactly the point the material makes. The path to liberation, therefore, involves addressing the underlying mental issues, the programming, the identification, before they continually manifest as debilitating physical symptoms. And the key to doing that lies in mastering the crucial difference between a response versus a reaction.
Okay, this feels like one of the most practical and vital distinctions in the entire framework. Can you break down the difference between responding and reacting?
Okay, a reaction is typically immediate, almost automatic, reflexive. It's driven by the limbic system, that emotional, primal part of the brain. It often bypasses the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for higher reasoning, planning, impulse control.
So it's like the autopilot kicking in based on the old film.
Precisely. And it's usually energy draining. Think of instantly firing back an angry email, yelling at someone in traffic, withdrawing into silence out of fear. Those are typical reactions. They just repeat the programmed behavior.
And reacting like that feels like you're just giving your power away to the trigger, to the old program.
Absolutely. You are. True self-mastery, in contrast, comes from cultivating the ability to respond. This starts with recognizing that even if an external event or someone's behavior triggers that initial internal impulse, that flash of anger or fear, the responsibility for how you then act or express yourself lies solely within you.
Taking ownership of the output, regardless of the input trigger.
Exactly. It means creating a pause, even just a microsecond, breathing, allowing that initial wave to pass without being swept away by it, and then choosing a conscious response.
That pause sounds like the critical space.
Yeah.
But it must be incredibly difficult to create that space when your body is already flooding with stress chemicals, urging you to react instantly.
It is difficult. It's the core practice, perhaps the work of a lifetime. But it's the only way to consciously engage the prefrontal cortex, the wise adult part of your brain. A conscious response is rooted in understanding, maybe patience, clarity, and definitely tranquility. It's energy preserving, often constructive. You're using the mind as a precise tool for navigating the situation rather than letting it run the show like a panicked child.
Okay, so this ongoing practice, observing the mind, catching the reaction, choosing a response, this is the engine that drives transformation. And the material makes a very specific point about transformation not being the same as simple change. Why is that distinction so critical?
It's critical because change is often temporary, transient. You might change your diet for a month, change your opinion for a day, change a habit for a week, but you can easily slide back into the old ways.
Right, New Year's resolutions often feel like change.
Exactly. Transformation, as described in this material, is something different. It's portrayed as a permanent, fundamental shift. It's irreversible. The analogy used is the metamorphosis of a caterpillar into a butterfly.
The butterfly can't go back to being a caterpillar.
Precisely. It's an irreversible state of awakening, of stability. It happens because the shift isn't just about modifying surface behavior. It involves moving beneath the level of thoughts and fundamentally altering the relationship you have with your mind and your sense of self. It's about realizing that intrinsic worth.
Okay, but I have to ask with this permanent and irreversible aspect again. What about setbacks? Everyone who tries these practices has moments where they fall back into old patterns, they react angrily, they get lost in worry. How does the material account for those very real human moments of relapse if transformation is permanent?
That's a really important and fair question. The material doesn't suggest transformation means becoming superhuman or eradicating all difficult emotions or bad days. That wouldn't be realistic. Instead, it suggests that transformation establishes a new center of gravity, a new baseline. So, yes, you might have a setback, a moment where you fall back into an old reactive pattern. But because the fundamental foundation of your worth has shifted from external validation to internal intrinsic worth, that relapse no longer defines you in the same way.
So you have a new home base to return to.
Exactly. You recognize the pattern faster, you don't get lost in it for as long, and you know how to return to that state of equanimity, that connection to your intrinsic worth. The relapse is seen as a temporary deviation from a new, stable baseline, not a collapse back to the old identity.
Okay, that makes more sense. So the ongoing goal isn't perfection, but cultivating this stable, balanced, steady state, this equanimity we mentioned earlier.
Precisely. Equanimity means you're no longer on that wild roller coaster, soaring with praise and crashing with criticism. You learn to accept life's unpredictable nature, the joys and the sorrows, the successes and the failures, without attaching your entire sense of self-worth to either extreme. You remain centered. This stable, balanced state is the liberated self, achieved through the diligent practice of observation and non-reaction.
And finally, the material takes this whole journey from the individual struggle to the individual liberation and expands it outwards. It talks about the global implication, the interconnectedness of it all. This seems like the ultimate culmination of the process, right?
It really is presented as the highest realization, the broadest perspective. When we genuinely internalize this understanding that we are all at our deepest core energy beings, that we are fundamentally part of a larger energy mass or consciousness, it naturally expands our sense of self.
Beyond just me and my problems.
Far beyond. It dissolves the rigid boundaries of the ego. This realization inherently deepens empathy, compassion. It allows us to connect with others on a much more fundamental spiritual level, rather than just interacting based on superficial personalities, roles, or political labels.
So by truly recognizing our shared spiritual core, seeing that same essence in others, despite all the surface differences in personality, history, culture, beliefs, we naturally start to move beyond the usual conflicts, the rivalries, the ego clashes.
That's the profound implication. The material argues that individual transformation, each person cultivating a more balanced, steady, equanimous mind, is actually the necessary catalyst for broader societal advancement.
Ah, so it's not about waiting for the world to change first.
No, that's putting the cart before the horse. If we wait for the external wind to become perfectly harmonious before we find our own inner peace, we'll likely be waiting forever. But the argument goes, if enough individuals do the inner work, if they each contribute a stable, consistent, compassionate mind to the collective, then the external world around us naturally starts to reflect that harmony. We move collectively beyond narrow self-centeredness towards genuine global well-being, a sense of shared humanity.
That's an incredibly hopeful and empowering vision. The idea that the key to a more peaceful world literally starts within the stillness and balance of each individual mind. Okay, let's try and summarize the core learning arc we've traced through the foundations of Angel Wing Volume 1. It's been a lot to unpack.
Okay, boiling it down. The journey really starts by identifying the trap, the paradox of external validation, PEV, which promises security but only delivers constraint and dependency.
Right, the illusion.
The definitive way out is recognizing and realizing your intrinsic worth, that unaltered, shared energetic essence that is your true core, completely immune to external judgment.
The reality beneath the illusion.
Exactly. And the practical path to accessing and living from that intrinsic worth is self-mastery. This involves the crucial steps of transcending identification with the mind and its stories, consciously observing and dismantling the old psychological films of subconscious programming, and taking full responsibility for choosing a conscious response over a habitual reaction.
It's really a journey from living as an external performance back to resting in internal truth.
Beautifully put, yes. And as we wrap up this deep dive, the material leaves us with a really provocative point to consider. It suggests that much, maybe most, of our deepest suffering today isn't actually caused by current external events.
No, then what?
It's caused by those deeply ingrained subconscious belief systems we've been talking about, the ones that manifest as self-imposed limitations. The researchers specifically note that the vast majority of our anxieties and worries are based on analyzing past events, things that statistically very rarely happen again in the same way in the future.
So we're spending huge amounts of emotional energy essentially anchored to old scripts, old fears that aren't even relevant anymore.
That's the challenging implication. So the final question the material poses really is for you, the listener, to reflect on. What specific constraining belief system, some ingrained notion about who you should be, what you must achieve, or what the world owes you are you currently holding on to? A belief that is anchoring you firmly to a past that factually no longer exists.
And the follow-up.
And the crucial follow-up is, how much of your potential, how much of your freedom, how much of your present joy is that specific, often unexamined belief system constraining right now?
That is indeed a profound thought to carry forward into your own practice of observation, non-reaction, and self-inquiry. Thank you for taking this incredibly insightful deep dive into this transformative material with us today.
It was truly a pleasure to explore these ideas.